In the early hours of a humid summer morning, the sky above the Pacific shimmered with the first pale light of dawn. From distant islands, the roar of engines grew steadily louder, an ominous, almost mechanical symphony that sent shivers down the spines of those below. Among the clouds, the formidable B-29 Superfortress appeared, a flying fortress of steel and firepower, seemingly unstoppable, gliding above enemy territory with a cold, calculated purpose. To the Japanese pilots watching from their cockpits, these massive bombers were more than just machines, they were nightmares made real. Each B-29 carried the weight of the American war machine, and every sortie meant devastation on the cities and factories of Japan. Yet for months, the brave men sent to intercept them struggled in vain. Their aircraft, though nimble and fast, were almost powerless against this airborne behemoth. Countless missions ended in frustration, in smoke-filled skies, in wreckage strewn across the sea. The stories of valiant pilots diving fearlessly, only to see their guns fail to pierce the armor, of these bombers became legendary among the fighter squadrons. There was a creeping sense of desperation, a quiet terror in the realization that something was different about these planes, something that made them untouchable. The B-29 had been the pinnacle of American aviation, designed with a precision that seemed almost surgical in its execution. Its sleek, long wings allowed it to soar higher and farther than any Japanese plane could reach. Pressurized cabins meant that it could fly above the thin, icy air where older fighters could not survive. And the most insidious innovation of all, the remote-controlled gun turrets allowed gunners to fire at incoming enemies with a frightening accuracy, without ever leaving the safety of their armored pods. These features were more than just technology. They were a statement, a message that the tides of war had shifted. For the pilots of Japan, it was like facing a ghost in the sky, a ghost that could see you, aim at you, and strike without warning. Many of these men had trained for years, their skills honed through countless dogfights over the Pacific. Yet even the most experienced aces found themselves helpless. Every engagement revealed the same truth. Traditional tactics that had once brought glory and victory now fell short, failing against this ironclad adversary. In the months leading up to these terrifying encounters, the Japanese military had become acutely aware of the B-29's destructive potential. Factories and cities in the home islands were targets for precision bombing campaigns, and intelligence reports hinted at the plane's devastating capabilities. But knowledge was not power, at least, not yet. Every attempt to intercept a B-29 ended with Japanese planes shot down, or worse, returning battered and broken, their pilots scarred both physically and mentally. Among these aviators, a quiet frustration grew. They needed answers, something to explain how a single bomber could resist all conventional attacks. And among them, one pilot, brave, persistent, and unusually observant, began to notice subtle patterns. He saw how the B-29 handled under fire, how it responded to evasive maneuvers, how its defensive weapons seemed almost to anticipate the movements of attackers. He began to realize that this was no ordinary machine. It was, in every sense, a fortress in the sky. The stakes were unlike anything they had faced before. By mid-1944, American B-29 seconds were flying missions deep into Japanese territory, striking cities that were previously considered safe. The Japanese anti-aircraft defenses were formidable on paper, yet time and again these flying fortresses slipped through. Pilots were sent out, sometimes in formations, sometimes alone, each hoping to find a weak point, to exploit a flaw. But every engagement ended the same way. The B-29 emerged relatively unscathed, while the interceptors returned with twisted metal and shattered dreams. These encounters were not just battles, they were lessons in futility. And for the pilot who watched and studied, the answer, though painful to realize, began to emerge. The plane's altitude, its speed, its sheer size, and the sophistication of its gun systems made it almost impossible to bring down without extraordinary risk. This understanding was a revelation, a key to the mystery that had haunted the fighter squadrons. But it came at a cost. Time had already run out. This pilot, like many of his comrades, was driven not only by duty, but by a deep sense of pride, a desire to protect their homeland. Each mission was a gamble, a delicate dance between life and death in a sky that seemed to favor the enemy. As the sun climbed higher, the air shimmered with heat, and the distant drone of engines became a constant reminder of the approaching threat. He flew again and again, each sortie giving him more insight into the B-29's strengths and weaknesses. He noticed how its gunners coordinated effortlessly, how its crews remained calm under pressure, how every defensive measure seemed to be a step ahead of any attack. Slowly, almost painfully, he began to piece together the mechanics of its near invincibility, and with every piece of knowledge gained, the weight of the inevitable pressed heavier upon him. For while he now understood why American bombers were so deadly, he also realized that understanding alone could not change the outcome. Too many planes had already struck, too many cities were already damaged, and too many lives had already been lost. The war was moving forward at a pace that left no room for error, and his discoveries, though brilliant, had come tragically late. Yet, in those skies, among clouds and smoke, there was also a profound sense of awe. To witness the B-29, to confront its engineering genius firsthand, was to glimpse the relentless march of human innovation, even amidst the horrors of war. The pilot could not help but feel a mixture of fear and respect. Here was a machine that seemed to embody the very essence of survival, combining speed, altitude, armor, and firepower into a nearly perfect weapon. It was a reminder that sometimes, in the chaos of conflict, technological advantage could outweigh skill, courage, and strategy. And so, as he prepared for another mission, he carried with him the bitter knowledge of what made these bombers so untouchable, and the heartbreaking realization that for his homeland, understanding had come just moments too late. Above him, the B-29 seconds glided with terrifying elegance, unaware of the man who had uncovered their secrets. Below, cities braced for the destruction that these giants would bring. And for the Japanese pilot, each flight was a journey into the heart of a machine that was almost impossible to defeat. A machine that had rewritten the rules of the air war over Japan forever. It was a story of bravery, of tragedy, and of insight that arrived when it could no longer alter the course of events. The sun, now fully risen, casting a harsh light on the shattered landscape, seemed to illuminate a truth both simple and cruel. In war, knowledge and timing must arrive together, or victory remains forever out of reach. As the day wore on, the Japanese pilots would climb again into the sky, engines roaring, hearts pounding, eyes searching for a weakness. And, in the clouds above, the B-29 seconds continued their relentless march, a symbol of innovation and power that few could stop. This was a war of machines and men, of courage against technology, and in this struggle, the lesson learned would remain one of the most haunting tales of aerial combat in history. A lesson discovered too late, yet remembered forever. The sky had become a battlefield unlike any Japan had faced before. For the men in their sleek, agile fighters, every B-29 mission felt like stepping into a nightmare, a contest against a machine that seemed almost alive in its defense. The Japanese pilots quickly learned that traditional dogfighting tactics, dives, high-speed passes, coordinated wing maneuvers, were often useless. The B-29's combination of altitude and speed put it beyond reach. Many of the fighters could climb rapidly, but even at their best, they found themselves straining at the edges of performance. struggling to intercept a bomber that seemed to glide effortlessly above their heads. For the men on the ground, each report brought more frustration, more anxiety, and a deepening awareness that the war in the air had entered a terrifying new phase. The pilot, who had begun to understand the B-29's strengths, had spent countless hours observing its behavior in combat. He noticed how the Americans had changed the very dynamics of aerial engagement. The B-29 was no longer just a bomber. It was a fortress in the sky, a mobile bastion that forced enemy pilots into near-impossible maneuvers. Its gunners, positioned in remote turrets along the fuselage, could rotate, elevate, and fire with precision, tracking incoming aircraft with deadly efficiency. The defensive fire was coordinated and overlapping, creating zones where any attacking plane was immediately at risk. Even if a pilot thought he had a clear path, the B-29's firepower seemed to anticipate him. And yet, despite these dangers, Japanese pilots continued to climb into the clouds, driven by duty, courage, and the desperate hope of finding a weakness. Through countless sorties, our observer began piecing together a strategy, almost like solving a complex puzzle in real time. He saw that the B-29's greatest advantage lay in a combination of altitude and speed, but also in the fact that its gunners could operate independently of the pilots controlling the plane. This meant that the bomber could maintain a straight, level course at high altitude, while its defensive weapons created a deadly barrier, making head-on, or side, attacks extremely risky. He realized that approaching from below or slightly ahead required precision, timing, and nerves of steel. Yet even this offered only a small window of opportunity. Every movement, every angle, every second counted, and even then, success was not guaranteed. Many of his colleagues had died attempting these very maneuvers, their aircraft riddled with fire from a bomber that seemed almost untouchable. What made the B-29 truly remarkable, and so frustrating to the Japanese, was the meticulous attention to detail in its design. Engineers had not left anything to chance. Its high-altitude performance allowed it to fly above the effective range of most anti-aircraft guns. The pressurized cabins meant that crews could operate at altitudes where ordinary pilots would suffer fatigue or oxygen deprivation. Its wings were long and efficient, allowing for sustained flight at maximum speed, and its engines were powerful, reliable, and capable of carrying enormous payloads. But it was the defensive armament that turned this aircraft into a nightmare for interceptors. Each turret was automated with a sighting system that allowed gunners to track incoming fighters accurately, and the overlapping fields of fire meant that a single B-29 could defend itself from multiple attackers simultaneously. To the Japanese pilots, this was no longer a challenge of skill alone. It was a contest against near perfection in engineering. As the observer studied the enemy, he also began to recognize the human element behind these machines. The American crews were disciplined, calm under pressure, and highly trained. Unlike the chaotic dogfights of earlier in the war, where adrenaline often dictated actions, these crews executed maneuvers with precision, sticking to flight paths and patterns that maximized both the bomber's speed and defensive capabilities. They were methodical, almost clinical, in the way they approached each mission. And for our pilot, this combination of human skill and mechanical advantage created an almost insurmountable barrier. He understood now why so many missions had ended in tragedy for his comrades, and why Japan's air defenses seemed powerless against this relentless aerial force. Yet, even with this knowledge, the war demanded action. Orders came down relentlessly: intercept, attack, and destroy. Civilians in the cities below relied on these pilots to stop the destruction, to protect their homes from fire and ruin. Every engagement became a test of courage and instinct, a split-second decision where success meant survival and failure could mean death. The observer, armed with insight, attempted to share his findings with others, hoping that a new strategy could turn the tide. But the problem was clear: time was against them. The B-29 had already struck countless targets, and Japan's industrial and urban centers were beginning to bear the scars of repeated raids. His revelations were brilliant, but the war's pace allowed little room for experimentation or adjustment. Each mission was a gamble, and the consequences of failure were catastrophic. In analyzing the encounters further, he began to document the specific vulnerabilities of the B-29, small cracks in an otherwise formidable armor. Attacks from certain angles, at precise speeds and distances, could theoretically achieve success, but the margin for error was razor-thin. The bomber's guns could cover nearly every approach vector, so only the most daring or desperate attacks had a chance. The pilot realized that in order to have a real impact, coordination among multiple fighters would be necessary. Yet such coordination was difficult to maintain at the altitudes and speeds required. Even with perfect timing, the risk to life remained extraordinarily high. For him, this realization brought both hope and despair: hope that the B-29 could be defeated, but despair at the human cost of attempting such missions. This knowledge weighed heavily on him. He had glimpsed the truth behind the invincible American bomber, and yet he had no way to turn that insight into meaningful change fast enough. Cities continued to burn, families suffered, and the war in the sky raged on. Each encounter with a B-29 became a test of nerve, skill, and desperation. The observer's story was one of both brilliance and tragedy, a reminder that understanding is not always enough. Even with insight, the realities of war timing, resources, and the relentless momentum of the enemy can render knowledge insufficient. And so, the Japanese pilots continued to fight, facing an enemy that was not just powerful, but almost impossible to touch, a flying fortress that redefined aerial warfare in the Pacific forever. Among the scattered squadrons, whispers of his discoveries spread slowly, like a candle flickering in the dark. Some listened carefully, while others dismissed it as too theoretical, too dangerous to act upon. The tension between what there was possible in theory and what could be executed in reality became painfully clear. For every pilot who grasped the lesson, there were countless others whose bravery alone could not overcome the bomber's defenses. And in this dangerous dance, the B-29 emerged not just as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of inevitability, of the shifting balance in the skies above Japan. Yet, amidst the despair, there remained moments of fleeting hope. Pilots tested new tactics, pushed their aircraft to limits, and occasionally found fleeting successes. A B-29, damaged, forced to retreat, or failing to complete its mission. These rare victories, however, were overshadowed by the sheer scale of the problem. For every bomber interrupted, many more succeeded. And the observer, watching from above, realized that the story was not only about machines or tactics, but about timing, circumstance, and the relentless march of technological superiority. He understood that the lesson of the B-29 was as much about human ingenuity as it was about the limitations of those who faced it, and so the sky remained a place of tension, of constant calculation, and of bravery measured against near-impossible odds. The Japanese pilot, armed with insight and courage, flew on, knowing that each mission carried the weight of understanding, arrived too late, a truth that would haunt the surviving veterans long after the engines fell silent and the bombs had stopped falling. The B-29 had rewritten the rules of aerial combat, and the lessons learned by those who faced it became a story of determination, tragedy, and awe, one that would echo through history as a testament to the terrifying combination of human skill and technological mastery. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the jagged coastlines and smoldering cities of Japan. In the cockpit, the Japanese pilot gripped the controls with a mixture of tension and grim resolve. Every sortie now felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of his discoveries pressed directly on his chest. He had uncovered the secrets of the B-29, understood its strengths, and seen its vulnerabilities. Yet, despite all of this, the sky itself seemed against him. Each mission became a battle against inevitability, a confrontation with a machine that had already rewritten the rules of aerial warfare. He knew that every second mattered, that every maneuver could be the difference between life and death, not just for himself, but for the cities below, for the people he had sworn to protect. On this particular morning, he climbed higher than usual, pushing his aircraft to its limits. Below, the coastline shimmered in the early light, and above, the distant hum of B-29 engines grew steadily louder. The formation of bombers was approaching with chilling precision, their long wings glinting like steel daggers in the rising sun. His heart raced, not with fear, but with a grim awareness of the stakes. He had studied the patterns, memorized the angles, calculated the timing of attacks to fractions of a second. Yet, even armed with knowledge, the odds remained daunting. Each bomber seemed to anticipate him, to move almost deliberately beyond the reach of his guns, while the overlapping fields of fire from their turrets created invisible walls of death. The first attack came in a rush. He dove, the wind screaming past, engines straining as he approached the formation. Tracers streaked through the sky like lightning, some narrowly missing, others cutting through the air, dangerously close. He felt the heat of near misses and the weight of his own mortality pressing down. This was no longer a test of skill alone. It was a test of courage, of instinct, of whether human daring could overcome engineered perfection. He adjusted his approach, banking sharply, climbing in a desperate attempt to find the tiny opening he had calculated might exist. Every movement had to be precise. Any mistake could mean death, or worse, failure to stop the destruction below. As he closed in, he glimpsed the truth he had already known. The B-29 seconds were nearly untouchable, each one a fortress in the clouds. Their defensive gunners, calm and coordinated, responded with terrifying accuracy. Still, he pressed on, driven not only by duty, but by the deep, stubborn courage that defined all those who flew into danger. For a fleeting moment, he felt as if he could touch victory, as if the secrets he had uncovered might finally translate into action. But the moment passed almost as quickly as it came. The defensive fire forced him to pull back, to retreat just enough to survive. It was then, hovering above the cloud line, that the full weight of his realization hit him. He understood why so many lives had been lost, why so many cities had burned, why Japan's air defenses had struggled against this relentless threat. His insight, brilliant though it was, had come too late to change the course of events. The B-29 had already exacted its toll. Factories lay in ruins, homes were gone, families had suffered, and the tide of war had shifted irrevocably. Knowledge, in this case, could not undo destruction. It could not bring back those who had already fallen or repair the shattered cities below. All it could do was serve as a testament to the bravery and sacrifice of those who had faced the impossible, who had dared to confront a machine that seemed invincible. As the mission continued, he observed the formation of bombers breaking apart to release their payload. Fire and smoke erupted on the ground in distant cities, a harsh reminder of the consequences of being too late. Each explosion carried a weight, not just of physical destruction, but of despair, frustration, and the bitter truth that understanding alone could not alter fate. In the air, he maneuvered carefully, avoiding the deadly arcs of gunfire, witnessing firsthand the precision and coordination of the American crews. It was awe-inspiring, terrifying, and humbling all at once. He realized that what he had learned would be remembered long after the war ended, not just as a story of failure, but as a lesson in the relentless pace of technological and tactical evolution. Descending back toward his base after the harrowing mission, he felt the exhaustion settle deep in his bones. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only the weight of reflection. He thought of the men who had not returned, the cities that lay in ruin, and the truth that had been so painfully clear in the skies above. Sometimes, insight arrives too late. His discoveries, though brilliant, could not change the course of destruction that had already been unleashed. And yet, there was a solemn pride in what he had learned, a recognition of human courage against near-impossible odds. He had understood the enemy, confronted it, and survived a small victory in a world dominated by loss. In the months that followed, the B-29 continued its relentless campaign, striking deeper into Japanese territory, each mission leaving a trail of smoke, fire, and sorrow. Pilots continued to climb into the skies, carrying the knowledge of their own limitations, yet refusing to surrender to fear. The observers' insights were shared, studied, and preserved, becoming a blueprint for understanding the aircraft that had seemed untouchable. Even in defeat, there was a lesson for future generations, a lesson about courage, resilience, and the harsh realities of war. By the end of the war, the stories of these encounters had become legend. The B-29 was remembered not only for its devastating impact, but for the nearly supernatural ability to survive against the odds. And among the Japanese pilots who had faced it, the memory of flying against that ironclad sky fortress remained vivid, a testament to human bravery, ingenuity, and the sobering reality of being outmatched. The observer, the one who had uncovered the secret too late, became a symbol of the delicate balance between knowledge and timing, a reminder that insight without opportunity could never alter destiny. As the sun set on the battered cities, painting the skies in shades of orange and crimson, it seemed almost poetic, a fitting backdrop for a story of courage, innovation, and tragedy. The pilot reflected on what he had seen, on the lives lost and the lessons learned, and understood that history had a way of testing humanity in ways that were cruel, unforgiving, and unrelenting. The B-29 had changed the war, had rewritten the rules of aerial combat, and had done so with terrifying efficiency. And for those who had flown against it, the skies would forever hold a memory of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of discovery arriving too late, and of a war where machines and men collided in a dance, both beautiful and deadly. In the end, the story was not just about planes or tactics, not just about victory or defeat. It was about the human spirit, the determination to fight, to learn, and to endure, even when the odds were insurmountable. It was about understanding the truth, facing it head-on, and carrying that knowledge forward, even when it could not change the past. And in that knowledge lay a quiet, solemn victory, a victory of awareness, courage, and the indomitable will of those who dared to fly against the impossible. The B-29 had shown the world what innovation could achieve, and the Japanese pilots had shown the world what bravery could endure. Both would be remembered, not as isolated moments of triumph or failure, but as a powerful testament to the relentless, unforgiving, and awe-inspiring nature of war itself.